Hey there folks, so welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we are finally going to be talking about the debut album from Idles called Brutalism. So I did not know what to expect going into this one. Seriously, I know, I'm months late covering this. It took a while for this to finally get up my schedule on Patreon, and I'm making some changes so that probably won't happen as often. But even with that time to research, I had the feeling like I was going to go in cold. I mean, I knew a few critics I respected liked this debut, but beyond that, not a damn clue what I was getting into. Outside the fact that these guys were a quintet from Bristol in the UK, and they made some raw, furious music, dropping their full-length debut this year after a couple of EPs. And you know what? I might not cover a lot of righteously angry music and rock or noise or punk or metal, but that doesn't mean I don't have my days when I crank up some explosive stuff and go in hard. And yeah, I am a post-punk fan, a little bit less of a hardcore punk fan. I've seen I'm still trying to get my handle on and work my way through the backlog of essential records. The genre's been around for a while, and there are a lot of albums to get through, but that doesn't mean that a really potent debut album might grab my attention. So okay, what did Idles deliver with Brutalism? Well, let me say this. I've always made the statement that best art, even if you can't directly relate to its themes or its place of origin or its artist, it can transcend those places and still connect with a wider audience. And even though I'm not really much of a fan of frenetic hardcore punk from what I've heard, I'm here to tell you that Brutalism is a damn great album and deserves a ton of attention. Man, I should have gotten to this earlier, because this is everything I like in my punk rock. Fast, melodic but not obtrusively so, strong grooves, potent vocals, and with real insight and a weight behind a social commentary that does not compromise on its firepower. And yeah, the title of this record, not lying, because this album is visceral, nasty, and yeah, brutal in the way that few albums will likely approach this year. Man, I enjoyed this. This rocks! And we need to start off with the production and instrumentation. And despite how I initially described Idles as pulling on hardcore punk, that's not entirely true. Oh, it's certainly there in a lot of the tempos and the explosive lo-fi filters over the vocals from the sneering powerhouse of the frontman Joe Talbot. And for the record, this guy is a monster of fun, taking in the thick accent of English working class angst and fusing with a real brain and a fiery temper. But this album owes a lot to post-punk as well, especially in the more prominent rattling bass guitar, which will often take prominence over the jagged spikes of atonal melody and the relentless shredding from the guitars. I take a song like Mother. Its bass has relentless seething presence against the sharper kick drums, as a distorted guitar juts in with increasingly twisted melodic phrases before erupting into a blurred together shredding moment that manages to still carry real melody and smuggles in a couple solos if you pay attention. I mean, sometimes the songs aren't quite as bass-driven. The squealing hammer of two-note progressions on Well Done that clanks off the creaking depths of a lot of the mix. The production balance here is really solid. Or the heavy kick drum stomp of Divide and Conquer, where the grind of the riffs drops into lockstep for a punching march as the guitar line just careens through the background there. Or the slightly more poppy hook around Exeter, which of course is utterly sarcastic, even as the main guitar riff just shreds and sparks off into the darkness, at least until the tempo subtly amps up with a little bit more bass guitar to ratchet up all that tension. But look, the majority of these songs, they have those bass grooves, and that leads to some phenomenal and yet very distinct bass lines. The choppy, grinding instability of Date Night that seems on the verge of flying off the rails at any second, even on the hook. The even faster, gritty riff that holds up Stendhal Syndrome as it roars up periodically, that's later echoed with even stronger melodic phrases on White Privilege. Then you have the most directly hardcore cut on Benzocaine, even as the guitars wheedle faster and faster to the depraved darkness of 1049 Gotho, which might be one of the most haunting plunges into filthy nightmare fuel that I have heard thus far this year. It is kick-ass. Hell, even if I do kind of agree with some critics that the hollowed piano piece Slow Savage that closed out the album doesn't fit all that perfectly with the rest of the album, it still does capture the mood ridiculously effectively, just with a little bit more modulation. It shows the band can step into that territory, and that's not bad. But if we're going to talk about where Brutalism steps up in spades, it's in the content and the themes. And yes, of course this is going to get political, but Idles have been refreshingly candid about how little they care when they just continue to plunge forward, and I can see why they've got that confidence, because when it comes to great political art, Idles checks off all three P's for me. I've already talked about the power in their instrumentation and production, and how they nail the populism by being unafraid to speak truth to the powerfully ignorant and the stupid. I mean, take Well Done. The instrumentation already captures a lot of the tension of that song, but what makes it so viscerally really satisfying for me is when it does cut loose, the slap back at the basic middle-class gentrification pushed down upon them as a way to get out of poverty, when in reality, it's just buying them more crap and feeds up to the upper class. Faith in the City gets to this too, except instead of cheap consumerism, it's religion, as the song just bleeds with sarcasm when they can't find jobs in the city, but hey, religion will hold them through. Sure, and it's telling how much Idols uses British cooking hosts to epitomize that tradition on songs like Well Done and Rachel Khoo, when in reality, if you're not paying into that system, the wealthy couldn't care less about failures in education and economics for the lower classes. Hell, on Divide and Conquer, it needs few words to describe how privatizing the NHS by splitting apart those who would defend it on the left will likely end up leaving powerless people dead. But where Idols really rise above this comes in that third P. Precision. And it really is stunning how much nuance they managed to cram into these songs despite language that is so blunt. Or on songs like 1049 Gotho, Exeter, White Privilege, and Heel, they are not above holding a mirror to themselves and to their audience. Take the last of those songs, as they freely admit they would love to be able to afford a Bovis home and count their money. They aren't immune to wanting things, but they utterly despise the smug condescension that's being used by the upper classes in order to sell it down to them. They aren't saying that they aren't like you, just that they don't like you. Or take the recklessness of White Privilege, which shows off people able to avoid some of the consequences of their stupidity and party hard and go wild, which is a privilege that a lot of non-white groups don't have in the same way. Or take Exeter, where poverty and boredom and overcompensating masculinity lead to bloody mayhem over and over again. For as much as the narrator wishes that something might happen, the consequences of that wish could get very grisly indeed. Or go to Date Night, where on first listen it might seem like a relationship that's being held together for appearances and little else, but then you get the second verse and one partner wanting to lead and cause changes in the system, but just like in the relationship, when confronted with society at large, they shut their mouths. But the two songs that really stood out to me thematically were Mother and Stendhal Syndrome. In the first case, we have a case where the protagonist's mother works desperately to propel her son out of poverty and scare those Tories because he learns to read, he gets up in the system, except there's no appreciation back for her, as he just stares at the pretty colors on the TV. And even if he were to get up there, it's not going to purge the systemic sexism and disinterest, which are entrenched in the educational structures, and if you're not going to change that, what's the point? But Stendhal Syndrome is a song that really got my attention, which on the surface seems to be savaging postmodern art that certain wealthy art dealers would scoff at as something that even they could do. But Talbot is snapping back. For as much as they can do it, they don't actually take that step, because that would require defending and engaging with the art beyond just pseudo-intellectualism, which might as well summarize the whole theme of this album. Yeah, it's brutal, it's hellish, it's ugly, it's explosive, which to some people, especially in the mainstream, will reflect a seeming lack of sophistication. But in doing so, it misses the point why that brutality exists at all, in a system that perpetuates that rage and ignores its underlying causes. In other words, hot damn, I was not expecting to like this as much as I do. And even if I don't have the broader reference points, in not at least first listen, in post-punk or hardcore punk to fully compare this to other albums, this was the shot of adrenaline and fury that I needed today. To the point where I have had trouble really finding flaws in it. Maybe a few of the guitar lines could have brought forward their blurred over melodies a little bit closer to the forefront to match up with some of the bass grooves. And again, Slow Savage is a bit of a clumsier note to end off the album, even though I do get why it's there to again humanize our protagonist. But this is still a very strong 8 out of 10, easy recommendation. Yes, I know, I'm very late to the party on this one, but if you haven't heard it yet, definitely worth a listen. Check it out, it's awesome. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Yeah, I know I'm late to this, but man, you should buy it. Links in the description below. Got the poll up there. Where did you guys think about this? I know there's more people who are into punk than I am, but hell, I thought this was awesome, and I'm curious where you guys found. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to get involved in my Patreon, the link to that is right there, where 3 times a week you guys can talk about my schedule and vote on it, and once per week people get to add records or even movies to my schedule. More details right there, and there's going to be a pretty big change-up coming there soon. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.